Well, first of all, thank you all for coming to my birthday party. And thank you, GOTO, for throwing me such a fabulous party. As a quick reminder, this will turn on, you can go to the GOTO app, click on Engage to rate the sessions. So DevOps Next. Part of my background is that I was in tech for a long time. I was a software engineer. I was a hardware engineer. And then I went and got a PhD because I was always fascinated with what made organizations click, what made our software development and delivery processes better. Because we can always hear stories about what makes us better, but I wanted evidence, right? I wanted a really good story, but with some data to back it up. Because sometimes we go to our managers, sometimes we go and we ask for more support, or we ask for more funding, or we ask for more resources, and they always say, yeah, but that's not going to work here. Yeah, but that's somewhere else. So for the last several years, since the late aughts, I have studied how teams in organizations, technology teams in organizations, can really drive IT performance. And not only that, how that IT performance contributes to organizational performance. And when I say organizational performance, I generally mean like money. So how does it make us better? So for decades, organizations would invest in IT, but this money was basically just going down the drain, right? So we'd put money into IT, but it never showed up on the bottom line. It never showed up in financial statements. It was just a way to keep up. Has anyone ever heard of the term cost center? Yes. IT was always a cost center. They gave us money because they had to, but they also gave us money and they put us down in the dusty corner in the basement, right? We're always laying cable in a dusty corner in a basement. We don't have good desks. We don't have good offices because they didn't think that it was going to help them. We were not going to be something that would help us move the organization forward. But suddenly we started noticing a handful of organizations that could, and they did this by using certain practices and processes. And here's why. They weren't just buying a server, throwing it in a closet, giving it pretty uplighting. Because any other company, your competitor, could buy that same server, throw it in the closet, buy a competitor's server, throw it in the closet. It would do the exact same thing. You could even do hard things. You could buy ERP systems. But so could anyone else. It was basically the same thing. So we would call that a point of parity, not a point of distinction. It was enough to help you keep up. It was never enough to help you get ahead. So that just sucked. I mean, that just wasn't going to be enough. Until we started digging a little bit deeper. So starting in late 2013, I sat down and we started doing some research with Jez Humble, Gene Kim, the team at Puppet Labs, and we realized that the DevOps movement is seeing something that's very, very different. And it's because it's this unique mix of people and process and technology, right? It's not just technology. It's all three. And it's starting to make big differences in organizations. And now we're hearing a lot of stories of how companies are actually making money and how they're making big, big differences. So we decided to do this study and include a measure of organizational performance. Because now you have the chance to not just have a competitive advantage, but have a sustainable competitive advantage. You can get ahead of your competition, you can stay ahead. It's not just going to be for a little bit at a time. So here's what we found. DevOps is good for IT performance, and this IT performance translates to organizations. So, quick background. Where did we come from? Quick history lesson. Have you guys heard of this talk? Is anyone here familiar with it? 10 deploys per day, dev and ops. I see a few hands. Okay, so for some of you who may not be familiar with this, there was a talk given at Velocity 2009 by John Allspaw and Paul Hammond. Dev and ops cooperation at Flickr. They were doing 10 deploys per day. At that time, this was just completely unheard of. People who were at the conference talked about it. People who were not at the conference talked about it. And it seems like the crowd was split. Some people thought this was the most amazing, amazing thing they had ever heard of. This was revolutionary. This was groundbreaking. The other half of the crowd was like, this is the worst thing you could ever possibly do. This is inhumane. What are you doing to your ops people? You were just like hammering them into the ground. Because if you know, like dev teams, right? Like you hand it over, you're going for happy hour, it's a party, like we're about to have. And the ops teams are like in a mad panic. But Alsma and Hammond are telling this story as a success story. So that was 2009. Let's look at some other examples. This is now. Amazon deployment stats. Now, let's be real. This is Amazon. They have more servers than God. They're reporting over 1,000 maximum deploys in a single hour. That's a deploy about every 11.5 seconds. Mean number of hosts receiving deploys simultaneously is 10,000 with a maximum of 30,000 deploys. Okay, so let's back that up. But still, let's look at Etsy. Etsy's code deployment. In 2013, Mike Britton reported, I think this was even at QCon, he said what once took 6 to 14 hours and what they called their deployment army, now, in 2013, took 15 minutes in a single person. They were doing 30 deploys per day in 2013. In March 2014, at QCon in London, he reports 50 deploys per day. And just a month later at ChefConf, they report doing 80 to 90 deploys per day. So look at that growth curve. Look at that learning curve. So this is clearly not a fluke, what Flickr had been reporting. So here's what we're saying. DevOps is good for IT. Now, when I'm talking about what's good for IT, here's what I'm talking about. When I talk about IT performance, I'm going to focus on two things. I'm going to talk about both throughput and stability. Okay? So we want to move code through the pipe as best as we can, but we also don't want to take it down at the back, because that doesn't help anyone. So when I talk about throughput, I'm talking about deployment frequency. Okay? Now, keep in mind, this doesn't necessarily mean you're delivering to customers. That can be a business decision. Okay? But we are talking about how often you can deploy. We are also talking about, at the bottom, another throughput statistic is lead time for changes. Code commit to code deploy. How long does it take you to get that through your pipeline? We also have mean time to recover. Those are the three things that statistically load together. We do actually capture one more statistic that is change fail rate. So when you do introduce a change to your production system, does it result in a failure? Or, since we know that our systems never actually fail, we just emergency patch them forever and ever and ever until they actually come up. We did ask if it results in a system failure or change in service or degradation of service. So when I'm talking about IT performance, what we did is we collected those measures and then came up with categories of companies, categories of IT teams, high, medium, and low. Okay? So they fell into logical groupings by themselves, the data did, high, medium, and low. So here's what we see. High-performing DevOps teams are more agile, so we see more throughput. High-performing teams compared to low-performing teams, we see 30 times more frequent deployments. We also see 200 times faster lead times than their peers. This is fantastic. So, right, think about this, what this means for your company. This can mean faster time to market, faster time for features. Let's pretend that you live in a fancy world where you have no competitors. This could mean faster time getting a security patch out. This could mean better compliance and regulatory responses. High-performing DevOps teams versus low-performing DevOps teams are also more reliable. So in 2014, the data reported 3x, and in a 2015 data set, it was 60x change success rate. So when a change was introduced into production, It was much less likely to result in any kind of incident. And when we talked about faster MTTR, 2015, it was 168x. So these are huge numbers, right? So this is no longer, we can't do this. By the way, this is on thousands and thousands of respondents. So we're talking about over 14,000 respondents, 2 years of data, thousands of companies, over 100 countries. So this isn't just startups, this isn't just enterprises, this isn't just one country, this is around the world. So if you're thinking about how this could apply to you, think about the times when we were asking for resources, we were asking for support, we were asking for money. This is how this has helped your company. And now we have evidence. So here's what's really interesting. DevOps promises and actually delivers better throughput, better stability, and they move together. They move in tandem. We aren't seeing trade-offs anywhere in the data. This flies in the face of what traditional IT has told us we have to do. We've always been told that we have to throttle our throughput in order to get stability. Has anyone here ever heard that before? I'm seeing some hands, right? And a few people are like maybe not wanting to put up hands. We've heard this, right? We've always heard that we have to slow things down. Well, do you know what's interesting? We don't see it anywhere in the data. Nowhere. Year over year, we consistently see that throughput and stability move together. When you think about it, this makes sense. Because stability is just, when your system goes down, you need to be able to roll back or introduce a patch or a new change into your system. What's the difference between your emergency change and your regular change process? No testing. How awesome of an idea is it to put a change into production without testing it? Especially when your system is already down? Not great. So if your pipeline is already very, very efficient, this has immediate payoffs in stability. So we talked about this, right? When you're more agile, you have more content delivery, you can start doing things like A/B testing as well. You can see what types of things are good for your company. Value around speed to market. You can also do compliance and regulatory changes and security as well. Now, this is a great quote by Kohavi. They did a lot of experimentation at Microsoft, and they found that evaluating well-designed and executed experiments that were designed to improve a key metric in the organization, only about 1/3 of those experiments were successful at improving the key metric. So think about having a pipeline where you can introduce code and do A/B testing. If only 1/3 of those are successful, 2/3 of those are not. With the ability to back out those 2/3, you now are more efficient in the work that you do. Or you can take the time spent on those 2/3 and go on holiday. Okay, high-performing DevOps teams are also more reliable. We talked about this as well. So what does this mean for value and savings around reliability? Value and savings around system uptime, compliance and security, or even reputation around compliance and security. Imagine the press releases that your company can put out when you're the only company that doesn't go down. Are you familiar with Netflix? And what happened when AWS went down? Years ago, Amazon went down. And they went down for a while. And the funny thing is that Netflix didn't really notice the first few hours. And for a long time, people thought that it was a conspiracy. Netflix had their own special batch of Amazon cloud because they were such a massive client. No, a couple hours in, that was when they noticed because everyone else was in a panic. Well, they finally made it to about 5 hours down when they finally decided to declare a Sev1 incident. What happened? They had such amazingly reliable systems because they had been building it in and testing it that their systems just didn't go down. It was from something called Chaos Monkey. Have you guys heard of Chaos Monkey? You don't choose Chaos Monkey. Chaos Monkey chooses you. Yes. They were already used to failure. They were used to building in failure and learning from it and building very reliable, secure systems. And when something went down, they could bring it up very, very quickly. So we also took a look at the data to see which key factors correlate with each component. So other things that are very good, we can see version control for all of your production artifacts, by the way. This includes system configurations, application configurations, not just your code. All of those are important. And we see that because anytime your system goes down, you need to be able to re-provision from code very, very quickly. Automated testing, monitoring, continuous delivery, all of these were important. Some other things that are interesting to note here. Culture, big predictor and very important, which we've known, at least anecdotally. Job satisfaction, it's a huge predictor, #1 predictor of organizational performance. And a climate for learning. By the way, new research suggests that the transformation is worth it. Has anyone here heard of the Mythical Man Month? So in production, like actual production of like widgets and things, as you add more people, you can make more things. This doesn't work in software delivery. But we went ahead and we took a look. For organizations that are deploying at least once a day, we cut down the data to only look at that. This is a plot of that. So your y-axis is deployment frequency, and your x-axis is number of developers. So if you take a look at that line that kind of dives, these are your low IT performers. They are doing everything possible to shove code out the door. And as you start adding more developers, that's your Mythical Man Month, right? That just tanks. If you take a look at your medium IT performers, that's the straight line right around. You're not seeing increases at all. Take a look at that yellow line, though. These are our high IT performers. These are the teams that are doing DevOps, and they're doing it incredibly well and incredibly efficiently. We see evidence to support the fact that if you can undergo this transformation and you can do it incredibly well, you may be able to break the barrier of this Mythical Man Month. You may be able to add developers and increase deploys. So this transformation and this investment is worth it. Okay, so we see that it's good for IT. How does it carry through to organizations? We took a look at the data, and we see that high IT performing organizations are twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. Now, this was across the entire sample of data. When we took a look at the companies that were large enough to be traded on a stock exchange, so that's a smaller set of data, we saw 50% higher market cap growth in the previous 3 years, which is really fascinating and great to find because historically, people have always said, especially enterprises, large companies have always said, oh, that only works for unicorns, that only works for small companies. Here's some solid evidence that it's working for large companies as well, and it's working in big, big ways. So, main contributors to organizational performance. We see here that IT performance and a strong DevOps practices, so we know that. And organizational culture is very important, and job satisfaction. Now, let's take a look at organizational culture quickly. One is pathological and power-oriented. Another is rule-oriented. The last is performance-oriented, also called trust-oriented. We can see clear differences here, particularly in how information is shared, how trust flows through the organization. Take a look, read through this. Who here has a friend that works in a power-oriented or pathological organization? You or a friend. We see a few. Who here works or has a friend who works in a bureaucratic organization? Who here or a friend has a friend that works in a performance-oriented organization? Okay. So in the data, we see it fall out about half are in rule-oriented. Again, this is the really interesting thing about this is that this in particular contributes both directly to IT performance and directly to organizational performance. So this carries through the organization. And we can see themes of DevOps culture throughout this. The fascinating thing is that this actually comes from a sociologist who studied healthcare and aviation. Things where It's a very complex system, and the risk is very high, and if you mess up, people die. But research also shows that we feel the risk and we feel the pain when we worry about screwing up too, right? I'm sure we've been there when we introduce an error into the code or when our systems go down. Like, we feel it. I remember feeling it. So this carries through as well. And we know that cooperation is important when we work across teams. Risks are shared. We know bridging is encouraged. Failure leads to inquiry. We know that blameless postmortems are an essential feature and a key component of doing the work that we do. Fast feedback loops are really important, and that novelty is such a big thing here. So, culture. Scott Cook is the founder of Intuit. He says, by installing a rampant innovation culture, we performed 165 experiments in the peak 3 months of tax season. Our business result? Conversion rate of the website is up 50%. Employee result? Everyone loves it because their new ideas can make it to market. So Intuit is a tax software. 10 years ago, no one would dream of doing huge experiments in the middle of tax season. That would just be crazy. But when else are you going to run experiments? No one else is going to be using your software except when they actually need to be using your software. So it was risky, but it was important. And the thing that I like about this call out here is that he points out that conversion rate of the website is up. That's their customers. But he also points out that it makes the employees happy. Imagine an environment where you can introduce changes and you can try out what you want to do. You can do your own experiments. If your experiment works, that's great. But even if your experiment doesn't work, you had the opportunity to test it and try it on real customers. This is another really great example. Greg Linden was at Amazon, and he had this great idea for recommenders at checkout. I assume we've all been to Amazon and ordered something. And on checkout, the recommender system is there. He walked into an SVP's office, senior vice president. He had already mocked up the prototype. He walked into his office and he showed it to him. Because he was thinking, when I go to the grocery store, they have loads of candy, they have magazines, they have all of these things I can buy on checkout. Senior vice president looked at him and said, absolutely not. You cannot do this. Because I'm too worried that if they see it, customers will be distracted and they will leave. You can just close a web browser. In a grocery store, you can't leave. It's like you're physically there. You're not going to leave. On a website, it's different. You can just flit off. You can do anything you want. SVP said no. Greg Linden says, okay, fine. Turns, leaves, walks out, goes back to his office. Typey, pushes it into production. He had coded up an A/B test, pushed it into production, leaves it up there for a little bit, comes back later with data showing significant gains in revenue. What kind of an organization do we work in? Do we work somewhere where an organization has a culture that, against the express wishes of your senior vice president, you push something into production, and if you have data to support what you did, you don't get fired? Greg says, I think building this culture is the key to innovation. Creativity must flow from everywhere. Whether you're a summer intern or the CTO, any good idea must be able to seek an objective test, preferably a test that exposes the idea to real customers. Everyone must be able to experiment, learn, and iterate. I'll point out here, the culture was absolutely key. But also, who else works in an environment where your infrastructure supports this? They had the foundation to be able to do this as well. Job satisfaction is also the #1 predictor of organizational performance in the data that we did, and we've seen this for decades across several organizations. Although it's funny, because for years people were like, I wonder if this works in IT. Yeah, maybe don't put us in the basement in the corner. Job sat counts. So we know IT performance is comprised of both throughput and stability, and both are possible together. They move together. We don't need trade-offs. We never see them, okay? IT performance contributes to org performance. Culture is a key predictor of both IT and org performance. Automation and tooling are important. So I've got IT performance and organizational performance, but what drives IT and organizational performance? What else is there? That's what we looked at next. So, step 1, define and investigate IT performance. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. Okay, first we took a look at continuous delivery. We wanted to look at automation and tooling practices. Okay, so when we took a look at continuous delivery, we specifically looked into these things. These things held up as being statistically significant in the data. So test, deployment, and automation, continuous integration, and all production artifacts in version control. This came up earlier, right, as a theme. So statistically, these things make up what is continuous delivery in the data. Continuous delivery then is predictive of lower change fail rates and IT performance. So we've had suspicions about this. We've been talking about it for years. Now we have evidence. Now the data shows us. Continuous delivery makes our work better. But do you know what's even better than that? It makes our work better, but it also, well, hold on, makes our work better. Also makes us feel better, but we'll get there in a minute. I've got this quote from Yahoo. We never had testability before. We have it now. We have this experience, and we know this stuff is working, and it's working with controls. They can do their automation configure and deployment of 250,000 nodes. They can deploy up to 140,000 nodes in 8 hours. So they're seeing huge efficiencies there. And they can patch the entire thing in 6 hours. So, by the way, CD makes our work better, which is awesome, but it also makes us feel better. I don't know about you, but that matters to me. As someone who was in tech for a long time, that matters to me. So we found in the data that continuous delivery decreases levels of deployment pain. And we know this, right? Like as you push something into production, it's like the things that you feel, the fear, the things that you're worried about. It also decreases feelings of burnout. We know that burnout is a significant problem in our industry, right? Working all hours, working long nights. We feel like a hero for a minute, but if we do that all the time, it just doesn't last. And after a while, we don't even necessarily love our jobs anymore. So this is some really great insight that we got out of this data. So, and the really cool thing is that we still see that tie all the way through to organizational performance. So continuous delivery, fantastically worth the investment, okay? So next up, we also took a look at lean management, okay? Because we know that DevOps isn't just tooling. Tooling's important, but it's also practice and processes. So within lean management was comprised of 3 things based on the data that we had. The first one is WIP limits. Who here does WIP limits? Oh, some hands, okay. By the way, pro tip, WIP limits are one of the best leading indicators of how your team is about to do. If your WIP backlog ends up being very, very, very big, that tends to be predictive of your future work starting to fall apart. Because we start having to hold too many things in our head, we worry about too many dependencies. WIP limits are a big deal. We also have visualizations to monitor work. And finally, monitoring, by the way, to make business decisions. Don't just have monitoring because it's pretty. Don't just make a dashboard because someone asked for it. Have some monitoring to make business decisions, not just paging to wake you up in the middle of the night. So these comprise lean management. Lean management makes our work better. Now, an example of this is Etsy. At Etsy, if it moves, they graph it. And they graph it and they make it visible for other people to see. And they graph it and they have their graphs in order of priority so that the dev team and the ops team can both see it. They also use what they call vertical line technology. These lines represent every time something was pushed to production. So you can see if it drastically changed something that was existing in the environment. And if you now have something, if you have free time, if you have free cycles and you have something to do, you know exactly what should be worked on next. You can make a business decision based on that. So, lean management also makes our work feel better. It decreases burnout, which is another great thing, right? Again, as I mentioned before, we know this is a problem or a concern in our workforce. It also leads to improved organizational culture. That Westrom culture that I showed you earlier. Remember the one that was pathological? We had some friends that worked in pathological cultures. We had a few friends that worked in bureaucratic and a few people here that worked for generative cultures. Lean management practices helps contribute to strong, trust-oriented cultures. And again, this carries through. Now, here was a great quote. I was chatting with Julia Westover a couple months ago. She said, I was trying to figure out why my team was working themselves to death, but not getting anything done. By implementing WIP limits, we were able to focus on our work. Finishing work feels better than sprinting and feeling like a hero in the moment, because that's only a moment. And again, we see organizational performance carrying through. So, we can see again that our DevOps drives IT and organizational performance, and we see it through our common themes. We've heard for years that DevOps is tooling and automation, it's practice and process, and it's culture. Because if we only throw money at one, sometimes we just want to buy the next tool and plug it in and think it's going to solve all of our problems. That's not what helps make companies money. So in tooling and automation, we see that continuous delivery drive IT and org performance. Practice and process, we see that in lean management practices. And culture, the Westrom high trust and information flow. So DevOps isn't just IT. It's how we practice IT. It's what we do with it. It gives us greater efficiency. It contributes to the bottom line. It helps make our companies money. But not only that, it helps us feel better in the way we do our work. So this is the lean for the software and technology transformation revolution. And again, this is our chance to make those investments in technology make a difference, not just for technology, but for our entire organizations. Because no longer do we work in companies that are just software or just retail or just finance. Every company is a software company. So this is our chance to bring our contributions to the world. Thank you very much. Remember to rate the session and post questions. And she has some. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, sure. I have some questions because people were asking questions through the app.
Great.
So first and foremost, how did you get the data about the company for the mentioned statistics?
Sure. So the data was collected through the Puppet Lab State of DevOps survey. And so it was a snowball sampling method. So it was posted through email lists and mailing lists, and then referrals out through there. For whoever asked the question, was that an adequate answer? Do you want more?
Okay, there's no scream of more. Okay. Then, how can DevOps be employed in an embedded development environment? For example, non-internet environment.
A non-internet environment? So we actually see DevOps in several environments. We see it in retail. We've seen it even in embedded firmware in HP LaserJet printers. The principles themselves can be applied anywhere, because as I mentioned previously, deploying and delivery can be a business decision. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to push it out to customers and out to the web. It can just mean breaking down work into small single-piece flow that moves quickly through the system, and then it can be packaged software at the end.
Okay, and then a soft one. Did you know that Forsgren is a Swedish last name and that means river branch?
I did know that.
So.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for asking questions, and thank you so much for this amazing party keynote. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.